Welcome to This Week in Heresy, episode 40, Environmentalism for All of Us, with our guest via Skype, Lupa GreenWolf. Hi, Lupa. Welcome to This Week in Heresy.
Hey, thank you for having me. Been looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. Well, for those who don't know you, could you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, like I said, I'm Lupa. I am an artist. I'm an author, amateur naturalist, wannabe polymath, et cetera, et cetera. I live in Portland, Oregon. And I've been pagan of one flavor or another since 1996, always pretty heavily invested in the nature-based end of it. And I've written several books on nature spirituality, ranging from non-indigenous totemism to working with hides and bones and artwork and spirituality. I make a lot of art with hides and bones as well. It's one of the things I'm best known for. And I do a lot of vending here in the Northwest. And the big hairy project that's been eating my life since the beginning of 2015 is the Tarot of Bones, which is a big art and writing project that's hopefully in summer 2016 will end up with a full deck and book. So that's the brief version of who I am, what I do, etc.
So when we were talking before and just now, you mentioned that you do a lot of environmental activism. Mm-hmm. What do you do? And, do you have a primary focus of what, do you focus on a particular part of environmentalism, or is it kind of a general making more of an education awareness kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I do not own tree spikes. You will not find me, chained to bridges and things. I'm kind of too old for that.
Right.
Granted, there are people who are twice my age who are chaining themselves to things. So, old is relative, but, I tend to be more of a lead through example kind of environmentalist. I live in, like I said, I live in Portland. I live in a very urban part of it. So it's been developed for over 100 years. Really not much in the way of the native landscape left.
Right.
I'm also an apartment dweller. One of the big challenges that people find with green living, especially, those tables and books and things of, do this to live a greener life, is a lot of them are tailored towards people who own their own homes. Mm-hmm. So something like install a gray water system. Well, my property management company would not approve. I think that'd probably break the lease. They won't even let me paint the walls, so I don't think a gray water system is in the cards.
Right.
But I do try to do what I can within the limitations that I have. I have a spot at the community garden down the street from me. I was on the waiting list for 3 years, but they finally got me an opening for a 10 by 20 plot. And so during the summer and fall, I get a lot of the household produce from that garden. And of course, it's all organic and not certified, but I don't use pesticides. We're not allowed to, and I wouldn't anyway. And part of the reason I do that is, to cut down the grocery bill. But part of it is also to show people, hey, we do have options besides go to the store and pay way too much money for something that, you could grow yourself with some effort.
Right.
I do have to say, I am pretty able-bodied. I'm in good condition, good health. My back likes to complain at me a little bit, and I have asthma. But other than that, I have the ability to go out and do things like dig around in the dirt for an afternoon. Mm-hmm. So I also try to be mindful that, not everybody has that option. Some people may need to stick to porch gardening. Some people may not really be able to do gardening at all. So what other options are there? And so my thoughts tend to be very much towards the how to make changes on an everyday basis that are more environmentally friendly and what that really means. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And, as a city dweller myself, I understand what you meant at the beginning, especially at the beginning where you're talking about, all the books that are saying like, you can't do this and install this and build a garden and this, that, and the other. And, and for some people, that's just not an option.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for me, like, I kill things,
Mm-hmm.
when I garden. I'm very happy to exchange other things that I do for people's garden stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I guess what it is that, and I've seen this a lot in the pagan community, especially with the more sustainable living side of the street. It's like, well, yeah, it would be nice if I could garden, but I kill things. It'd be nice if I could put in a water system, but like you, I rent. So I guess part of what I'm trying to say is that being a city dwelling pagan, it gets really frustrating when people are kind of high and mighty about their environmentalism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I can be pretty opinionated, and I admit that. And I'll be on Facebook, and I'll get into an argument with somebody, and it's not meant personally. It's just there are a lot of things that are really, really emotionally charged,
Right?
And it's just the nature of being in a world with people who see things differently than you. And sometimes I just have to kind of push myself away from the keyboard for a bit and then come back and say, you know what, I screwed up. I'm sorry. That was a little too intense. Where can we find some middle ground? Mm-hmm. I think you're right, though, with the pagan community in general, whether it's environmentalism or theology or, practice, it's really easy for us to sometimes get entangled in where our differences are.
Yeah.
And it can be tougher sometimes to find where we come together, especially when people feel like the differences aren't being acknowledged. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I've been doing actually quite a few interviews about that lately. So,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Especially around pagans of color. So
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's all well and good to say, yay, we're all family and all pagans are welcome and blah, 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 blah. And then you have somebody else saying, well, I didn't really feel welcome, in this situation, or I don't feel welcome in this discussion.
Right.
And that's a tough balance. And I think with regards to the environmentalism, it can be really easy to alienate people. It can be really easy, for example, that's part of why I acknowledged a few minutes ago about, I'm able to do things like gardening, because if I just sit and say, well, everybody who has, access to land or a yard or whatever should turn it all into garden and tear up your lawn. And some people don't have the time or the ability to do that. And that's why we look to multiple potential solutions. Because we've got complex problems. How can we find a simple solution for a complex problem?
Exactly. And, especially here in California with the drought, it's been much more difficult because,
I bet.
Because like for me, we're gonna mow our lawn. Like we've been letting our lawn grow. We're not worried about watering it or anything because, we don't want to waste water either.
Yep.
I don't want to plant a garden either. Like I would consider trying it, but I don't want to do that because we have a year of water left, or at least according to the news that I saw this morning.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, that may even be a consideration here. I'm actually, we have a fraction of the snowpack over on Mount Hood, which is where a lot of our a lot of our water comes from. We have a fraction of what we should have. Mm-hmm. And, I'm looking at, okay, what can I grow this year that's less water intensive? For example, I'm not going to be planting nearly as many tomatoes as I normally do because they're water hogs. Right. They like the water. If I need tomatoes, I'll go to the farmer's market and buy a flat of tomatoes from somebody who's going to be growing, hundreds of plants anyway.
Yeah.
And I'll dedicate my bit of land to something a little less thirsty.
Mm-hmm. And, that's what I know for myself, and maybe we can go through some things that city dwellers can do. Mm-hmm. I know one of the things that I want to do is find the local farmers market because I think, you know, trading, whether it's money or my time or, you know, with people, you know, is a good way to kind of start in the process of being more environmentally friendly, even as a city dweller.
Yeah, exactly. I think really it can feel really overwhelming to people who want to make change, but who aren't really sure where to start. Partly because it's such a complicated set of problems. You know, we're looking at everything from climate change to wildlife habitat loss to pollution,
right,
to invasive species, all these things. I mean, when I was a kid, I'm in my 30s. I grew up in the 80s, and when I was a kid, the big thing was don't litter. Litter's bad. Throw it in the trash can.
Yep.
And
give a hoot, don't pollute.
Exactly. You know, that, and, you know, Smokey the Bear, you know, only you can prevent forest fires. You know, it was these simple little sound bites. And as I got older and did more research, I'm finding, wow, there's a whole lot more to this than just, you know, don't, you know, pick up your trash. You know, I live down the Columbia River from the Hanford site, which is, you know, a storage space for nuclear waste.
Right.
And, you know, I'm not picking that litter up. I'm not qualified.
Right.
So, yeah. So it's again, complicated problems. So what I often tell people, you know, part of why I do a lot of modeling of things, you know, I talk on Facebook and Tumblr and stuff about things I'm doing, is to kind of get people thinking about, well, hey, maybe I could do that too. You know, as social creatures, we like to see what other people are up to. We like to do things. You know, we're all apes with Facebook, which, you know, is actually kind of cool if you think about it.
Cool in some ways, weird in others.
Oh yeah.
But that's the nature of Facebook, I think.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, we you know, we do tend to imitate each other, and we tend to act like the people we're around, and so it's not just a matter of blind following. It's, you know, there's this conscious choice in there too. There's, you know, for example, whenever I post pictures of my garden on Facebook, a lot of times I'll get people, you know, commenting or messaging me saying, you know, hey, I really want to try doing this now that you're doing it. You've motivated me. Thank you. And it's one small thing, you know, that I talk about. I do a lot of, not as much as I'd like to anymore, but I do some volunteering with local environmental groups. Again, less along the lines of chaining myself to stuff and more along the lines of tree planting and invasive species removal. I've got a stretch of the Columbia River that I adopted a few years ago, and I do quarterly cleanups, and I you know, report back on things like the flora and fauna, and I do water testing. And I'm able to monitor that site. And that way, if anything big, you know, and strange happens change-wise, then the organization that I volunteer through can go and say, okay, let's look at this a little more closely and figure out where it's coming from. Maybe there's a new pollutant coming down the river. Maybe, you know, migration patterns have changed, things like that.
Right.
And so I talk about this stuff because I want to show people, here's what I'm able to do. And I'm just one little person, albeit I'm a person who's self-employed. So I have a little more schedule flexibility, but, you know, I'm still out there. So what I tell people is to, you know, you can start simple. You don't have to save the world. You can just save one teeny little bitty piece of it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And, you know, it's something I talk about with other people as well. I always like to talk about how even if it's prayer, you know, even if it's writing a letter to your congressman, you know, you're doing something, because, you know, everybody has different levels of ability, physical and or otherwise. And, you know, not being able to do something doesn't disqualify you from doing activism.
Exactly. And, you know, it is a matter of finding where your strengths are, play to your strengths. I do have a few biases in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I've been to a number of rituals where, the basic gist of it was, let's raise energy for the planet. Let's wrap the world in a blanket of love and peace and healing, etc. I think that it's effective as far as building, mutual rapport with other people that you're working with. I think it's also effective for reminding people how important it is to be aware of global issues.
Right.
The problem I feel, and again, this is, coming from my own perspective, is when people treat that like that's the only thing they really need to do. Like they do this ritual of let's heal the earth and make everything better. And then they go back home and they're using styrofoam plates and, they're letting their car idle for, 15 minutes in the morning, even when it's not cold. And, making a number of other decisions that they maybe could do a little differently. And I think that, some of those may be necessary, somebody who's got, either a really, really busy schedule or, again, is maybe having physical issues as far as just the simple act of doing dishes, disposable plates may be the better option. But is there maybe something better than styrofoam? Is there maybe recycled paper? Things of that nature. So I think that the heal the world kind of ritual is a great starting point. I think it's a good stepping stone onto, okay, I take this energy with me into the world, and what do I do with it? I do a spell to, heal a polluted river. But then what can I reasonably do to further that in a physical case? It's like any other magic. You got to back it up with some kind of something on the mundane level.
Yeah, I mean, I was telling somebody earlier today, the gods can only do so much.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have to go and do it for yourself as well, or for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and it is a matter of choice a lot of the time, and I try to get, sometimes I can't always make the choices I want to make, but I do try to get the recycled packaging so that they do more recycle, the recycled toilet paper and that kind of thing. For some people, it's a lot harder because they may be in a situation where, they're poor and they're in a neighborhood where they just can't do that.
Can't get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, it's, I don't like people feeling guilty about what they're doing. Unless there's like a major corporate polluter, then I want them to feel guilty about it.
Right.
But, people like you and me, and especially people who may not have as many resources as I do, I don't want them to feel bad if they're not doing the same stuff that I do. I want people to feel empowered to make what steps they are able to, because again, it can feel so overwhelming. And even I go through these stages where I just feel absolutely horrible because, I'm using electric lights, or I have a car, or, I didn't, my where I live, I can only recycle number 1 and 2 plastics. If I walk 5 blocks away, I could take the rest of them down to Whole Foods and they have a big, recycling bin for other plastics. But that involves me walking 5 blocks. It also, also have to go through and hand wash everything before I put it in there. Because I got this big sign that says, if there's any food waste left on these, we'll throw the whole thing away. And I don't want to be the person who's responsible for an entire dumpster of plastic getting thrown out because I didn't get, a smidgen of mayo off a plastic bag.
Right.
Oh my God, the pressure.
Yeah. And, I think the other thing too is there's stuff that we can do individually But I think there's also the responsibility as citizens in America, especially if you are a registered voter, to try and get the legislatures to come on board. Now, in some areas, it's way harder than others. But, you know, the other frustrating thing about this is that our government is just not there when it comes to environmentalism.
Yeah. And it's a broken system. And that's the thing. I mean, even all of us, even if all of us like switched to recycled toilet paper and took 5-minute showers and, you know, things like that, it would not change, for example, the enormous amounts of pollution and other problems that come from corporate gigantic interests.
Right.
You know, a good example is corporate agriculture. You know, conventional agriculture is absolutely full of really awful chemicals. For example, nitrogen-based fertilizers. Because all the chemicals in the soil destroy the fungi and microscopic beings that make soil healthy and that are necessary for plants to be able to draw in nutrients and so forth. Because those things get destroyed by the chemicals, farmers then have to go put nitrogen-based fertilizers on the crops so that they have something to grow on. You know, it's kind of like feeding a kid nothing but sugar. You know, it gets them that initial energy burst, but it's so bad for them if that's all they're getting. And then, of course, that nitrogen washes off into the water, washes down the river, washes out into the ocean, and you end up with these gigantic algae blooms that kill everything. You end up with anoxic areas that have no oxygen. Right. Anything that swims into it is dead.
Yep.
And it's all because our food system has been created without taking the environment into account unless it makes itself a major issue. Hence, for example, the Dust Bowl.
Right. Right. And, you know, there are plenty of ways scientifically that have been proven to work where, you know, you can use less of the chemicals or none of the chemicals, you know, and I know this isn't a very popular topic with a lot of people, but I am a biochemist first. That was my first career. And, you know, and I worked with some agriculture professors as part of my internship. And, you know, I think there is a place for genetic modification in the idea of growing without chemicals. I know that's not very popular with a lot of people because there's a very big anti-GMO crowd, and that's another whole big ball of wax. But, you know, we have the science to help us out this way. And it really, and you know, I'm glad you brought it up because it really frustrates me when I go into certain parts of California where, you know, they're talking about they should give us all the water. And it's just like, do you realize we don't have the water to give? And, you know, science could help in this. And they're just not, they've got blinders on to the necessity of it.
Yeah, the anti-science trend in the U.S. in general drives me absolutely crazy. And there's certain strains of it that you find within the pagan community that are really kind of frustrating. You know, it's everything from you know, anything from something simple like I don't believe that. Well, it's not a simple thing, but, you know, we do have pagan anti-vaxxers. We do have people who believe very strongly that if they give their kid vaccinations, they're going to end up with autism, as though autism is this horrible fate that nobody should have to go through.
Right.
Which, you know, that's a whole different debate.
That's a whole nother interview.
All I'm going to say is I don't see my friends who have autism as being flawed.
Right.
And they are not a fate to be, avoided at all costs.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. So you have people who have, sort of single, they might be pretty up and up on things in most ways, but they have like that one issue that really just kind of drives them crazy. And they hate it. And no matter how much science you show them, they're just going to, confirmation bias their way out the door. But then you have it's sort of this more pervasive science versus spirituality trend in which you have people who basically think that, well, A, they don't understand how science works, and B, they think that there's absolutely no place for science in spirituality. They see science as taking all the fun out of life. I frequently not frequently, but have now and then run into people who claim that this world has no magic because we can't do things like fly or shoot fireballs because it's not like D&D. And they feel that maybe sometimes their spells and stuff work and do things, but they feel like the real magic left, centuries or millennia ago back in some ancient misty past.
Right.
And I feel they're really missing out on some amazing stuff. I am a nature-based pagan. That sounds like it should be redundant, but there are pagans whose paganisms, of course, are based in things other than nature. So, but I will say again, I am a nature-based pagan. And my spirituality is based in the wonder and awe that I feel simply through existing. And spirituality is a wonderful personal way for me to engage with those feelings and to create some personal meaning through that. Science is how I get more knowledge and learn more cool stuff to feel wonder and awe about. My formal background is primarily in the humanities because I'm absolutely terrible at math. I would rather gnaw my own leg off than take another algebra course. I started out in life sciences, ended up in English because, I'll write about the animals rather than studying them.
Right.
But I'm still an armchair naturalist. I love hiking. I love camping. I read voraciously about everything from the geology to the living beings to the climate and weather of the Pacific Northwest. And it's all lay people stuff. But it's very informative and it gives me a decent understanding of what's going on out there. And the more I read and the more documentaries I watch, the more I'm able to take that into the real world. And when I'm out hiking, I can say, oh, I know that that's a white-breasted nuthatch. And I know how that bird got its name and I know its personality. And I'm getting a little better at figuring out what its sound is. And wow, that's just really, really cool that I share the world with this little bird, this tiny dinosaur that's, bouncing up in the trees above me, things like that. And I really want to emphasize to people, pagan and otherwise, that, I'm not alone in feeling that. And you can feel that too. You can have that same joy of just, the sheer awesomeness of existing.
Absolutely. And, I'd actually argue that, the math part of science, if you want to be a professional scientist, you're going to need that. And it's kind of inevitable. It's just at least it's statistics to one degree or another. But, to be a scientist doesn't necessarily mean that math is all there is to it. And what you described to me is what a scientist is. It is seeing nature and trying to understand it. And, and in my own personal beliefs as a scientist, It's that awe and wonder that makes you go, okay, what is that? Well, how does that work?
Yep.
And, depending on where you're driven is what science you do. And I absolutely agree with you. I think having that wonder isn't a bad thing. And I think if people had more of that wonder, we might be a little bit better off.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we'd be better off for a number of reasons. I think we'd be better off because one of my big theories, hypotheses anyway, about why we've got the environment so screwed up. One of the things I didn't mention is that I have my master's degree in counseling psychology, and I have an additional certification in ecopsychology, which is the psychology of how we relate to the rest of the world. One of my sort of pet hypotheses is that we destroy the rest of nature because we don't feel connected to it. We've convinced ourselves, especially with the rise of the industrial age and then everything that followed it, basically the last couple hundred years, we've convinced ourselves that we are separate from nature. Some of that is due to arrogance. We're better than nature and therefore we can use it however we like. Some of it is guilt. Some people feel that we should keep our hands off of nature because, oh my gosh, we've done so much damage to it already that, we destroy everything we touch. Let's just,
finish the job.
Finish a job or just, keep away from it. And that keep away, unfortunately, keeps the rest of nature abstracted. I see us as nature. We're apes that evolved big brains and opposable thumbs and upright walking. And we have a really big penchant for tool use.
Right.
But we still need to eat. We still need to breathe. We still need water, et cetera, et cetera. We're still critters like the other critters.
Right.
And because of the peculiarities of our psychology, when we see ourselves as separate from something, we feel more able to destroy it, whether actively or passively. And it's a depersonalization. We do that with other people. We do that with other animals. We do that with nature in general. And it's really kind of heartbreaking because it's bad for everybody involved. It's bad, of course, for the rest of nature because we're just chewing it up at a ridiculous rate. It's also bad for us because we're so isolated. Some people feel like because we're the only species that, extensively speaks English, we feel like we don't have anybody to talk to except ourselves. We end up with this isolation that we feel, and we've forgotten how to listen to the language of other species, of landforms, of waterways. And it's really distressing to watch this happen to people, especially because I've rediscovered that connection. And I almost kind of feel a little bit like an evangelist for it. Yeah. I know evangelist is kind of a dirty word among pagans, but, I want to spread that. One of the things I do with my books, I feel a little bit subversive. I write about, nature, spirituality. And most of the people who I'm trying to get the attention of are not people who necessarily consider themselves scientists, whether citizen scientists or professional scientists.
Right.
Most people who, for example, want to read about, non-Indigenous totemism are people who just want a being who is going to fix their lives. They want to read a book and read, well, this animal means this, and therefore I can apply that to my life and my life will be better. Now, that's a great starting point. But, after you get yourself fixed up, then what do you do with it? What do you do with yourself? And so I kind of lure people in with, hey, look, shiny spirituality. Here's a book to give you answers. And instead of giving them answers, I give them tools. I give them a toolkit to deepen the relationship with the land and with spiritual beings, et cetera, whatever I happen to be writing about. And then I invite them to take that further. And I specifically invite them to give back to the beings and the land that have, helped them get further. Every single one of my books has a list of nonprofit organizations that I recommend to people for donations and volunteering and so forth to give back as a form of offering. As much as you're able. I don't say, you should give this much, I don't believe in tithing. I don't think, you should give 10% of your income. But, people ask me, well, what offerings should I make to such and such being for helping me through? And I say, well, what part of nature, what part of the physical world are they connected to? And how can you help that? Mm-hmm. Even just a little bit. So like I said, it's not so much a bait and switch as it is, here I'm going to offer you candy and then tell you about the benefits of following it up with a really good salad with lots of crunchy things in it.
Yeah. And I guess that's what I was trying to get at earlier. It's just that, is that, yes, you found out something really interesting now, like you were saying, here's the candy. Now go eat your salad, and we'll have more candy later.
Yeah, exactly. We can have both. It's not a either or. You can have your spirituality and your science too.
Absolutely.
And especially with nature-based spiritualities, the science is so important. It's so important because you want to have an accurate idea of what it is that you're mythologizing, what it is that you're finding personal meaning in. A lot of people see lions as these sort of noble creatures. They've been symbols of regency and so forth for, centuries in numerous cultures in Europe and Asia and Africa. And hyenas, on the other hand, spotted hyenas have been absolutely vilified. Nasty, evil magic, et cetera, et cetera. Just look at the Lion King.
Right.
It's fiction, but it really carries those biases very strongly.
Yeah, I was just thinking that actually.
Yeah. And in actuality, lions are kind of jerks. Male lions will kill the young. If let's say one male lion chases off the main pride male of a particular pride, then that new lion will go in and kill all the young cubs of the lion that was ousted. Just go through and slaughter them.
Wow.
And it's that, there are several different species that do that sort of infanticide. But yeah, in the Lion King, if things had been, true to life, then, Scar would have killed Simba and it would have been a totally different story. Of course, this is Disney. We couldn't do that.
Well, yeah.
But that's just one of the things they do. They also deliberately hunt hyenas. They will kill anything that they think is, competition for food. So cheetahs, leopards, et cetera. But they seem to have a special hatred for hyenas because they occupy such a similar niche. And young male lions will actually go hyena hunting. On the other hand, hyenas, they're a matriarchal society. They're very very good parents. So are lions, but people have this idea that hyenas are horrible, all around. They're very good parents. They're very, good to their clan. In fact, they will take care of older members.
Oh, wow.
The most amazing thing I found was actually that hyenas have a higher kill rate than lions. They're actually better hunters, and lions are just as likely, if not more likely, to scavenge kills from other beings, other predators, and they'll just muscle their way into it. They'll scare off the predator. There's numerous documentaries showing cheetahs getting scared off of their kills by lions and also by hyenas.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the simplistic idea is that lion's good, hyena's bad. But the reality is that they're both social predators that evolved very complex ways of dealing with the same challenges in the same habitat. Mm-hmm. And it's not good, it's not bad. It is what it is. And we have a lot to learn from that, not the least of which being the downfall of projecting ourselves too much onto other beings.
Right. But also, the projecting is one thing, but also seeing that, that behavior is that kind of instinctual behavior, things like that, mm-hmm. is also a part of us that mm-hmm. we can't, we can say that we're better than animals, but we are animals as well. And mm-hmm. like you were saying before, we are part of that system, mm-hmm. and we have similar behaviors, and
yep.
to acknowledge that.
Well, and we too, like the lions, we have a tendency to go after beings that occupy a similar niche. Have you ever read the book of Wolves and Men by Barry Holston Lopez?
I have not.
Okay, it's considered a classic text on not just wolf behavior and wolf science, but also the human relationship with wolves. Some of the science, of course, is dated. It came out in 1979, I think. Mm-hmm. So some of it's dated, some of it still holds up pretty well. The thing that really holds up well, though, is the author goes into really incredible detail looking at why humans persecute wolves so viciously, even compared to similar large predators. There's a particular hatred among certain ranchers, farmers, et cetera, and other people for wolves that you just don't find with other animals, predatory and otherwise.
Right.
And the theory is that it's because wolves and humans occupy a very similar niche when they're in the same habitat. They're both social hunters that run down their prey over a long period of time, and they're both territorial. And we see so much of ourselves in them. It's kind of that love-hate relationship. The wolf gave us the dog.
Right.
And we're okay with the dog because the dog has bent to our will. The wolf is a dog that will not bend to our will. And that's threatening to us.
Right. Well, that's kind of the way patriarchal society works, at mm-hmm. least in my point of view.
Yeah.
It's the, my will is greater than yours because mm-hmm. I'm high mucky muck, or I'm male, or
yep,
et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of projection involved in that too. Mm-hmm. Part of why people say, well, what does this animal mean? Or what does this plant mean? It's kind of useless to ask me that because I'm not going to give you a simple answer. What I'm going to tell you is A, go to that spirit, et cetera, yourself. But B, I'm also going to say, observe the animal or plant or whatever in its natural habitat and learn from that. All of the sort of spiritual meanings we associate with animals and so forth are directly derived from our and our ancestors' observation in the field, and then us applying meaning to that. Mm-hmm. And in order to figure out what something means to you, yes, it's good to know cultural meanings. Yes, it's good to know the meanings of the people around you. But in order to know your meaning, to have your relationship, you need to do the work yourself. And so, again, a lot of the stuff that I write about encourages people to do that work themselves. I won't write a dictionary format.
Right.
I don't tell people what such and such being means. I say, I may give a couple of examples of my experiences, but then I say, that's my experience. Now you go figure out your experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, I find that, I'm thinking as you're talking, a lot of this really relates to your Terror of the Bones project. And I do want to talk about that because I'm finding it very fascinating. And I was looking at the pictures and, for me, for someone who, like, I do a lot of work around death and dying. So for me, your project is just really fascinating. It really draws me in.
Thank you.
And it sounds like from what you're describing is that, you're putting a lot of those ideas into this deck.
Yeah. Well, just for people who haven't seen it yet, just a quick recap. The Tarot of Bones is a project I started at the beginning of 2015. It's been kind of percolating in the back of my head, like so many of my ideas do. And I decided 2015 was going to be the year I was going to make it happen. And what it is I'm making 78 permanent assemblage pieces, one for each of the tarot cards, and each one centers on an animal skull or other bones with other natural and reclaimed materials.
Right.
Then I'm going to be taking photos of those. That's going to be the card art, and I'm going to release it in, like I said, summer of 2016 with a companion book that I'm writing as I go along, so I don't have to write the whole thing at once.
Right.
And so my work with hide and bone has always been funerary in nature. I started in 1998. And like I said, I work with hides and bones and other remains, and making them into pouches and ritual wear and ritual tools and jewelry and wall hangings, etc. Ever since then. And some of it has been, for my aesthetic, but some of it has been, a lot of it has been to give these remains a better afterlife than being, a trophy on a wall or a status symbol, something else where the person who owns it isn't appreciating what it is.
Right.
And so with the Tarot of Bones, it's bringing together what, the most permanent part of a vertebrate animal. Right. Long after the flesh is gone and the hair is gone and the sinews and the blood, you still have bones. And bones can last for hundreds of years. And if they last long enough, they fossilize, and then they basically just become immortal, at least until whatever piece of rock they're in ends up, diving under a plate and into the magma, and then becomes, but for all intents and purposes, it's, immortalized. And so I'm combining that natural energy of the bones, of the structure of the animal, with the archetypes of the 78 cards of the tarot. And it's the biggest, craziest, most elaborate project I've ever, engaged in. Ask me in a year how I feel about it when I'm getting close to releasing the thing. I'm still in the this is awesome phase. But it really does kind of bring up those senses of permanence and memory and the power of non-human ancestors and family, and being able to talk to them about that. A lot of people think of ancestors, they only think of, their human ancestors. And for pagans, a lot of time it's like trying to dig our way through the Christian ancestors to get to the pagan ones.
Yeah.
My idea of ancestors and my extended family tree goes way beyond that, all the way back to the primordial soup.
Right.
And so I want to be able to draw on that sense of a greater family as far as the calling of the quote unquote ancestors with this deck.
Like I said, I'm really drawn into it, and I think you're right. People don't tend to forget that our ancestors aren't just ourselves as humans, and and you look at it when people talk about their pets. They are animals that we love and care for, and they also are our ancestors because they do go on. When they pass away, at least I believe that to be true. It's, however people believe, but, I like, I'm looking actually at the Ace of Pentacles right now, and I'm finding it really fascinating because there's so much life symbology with this symbol of mortality. And, and I'm always fascinated about how in our society we tend to gloss over the mortality of our existence.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this could be another whole interview, but there's very few. There's not a lot of things in our society that allow us to really confront that. And I'm really pleased and fascinated with the work you're doing, and I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of them come out as
Thank you.
the year goes on.
Thank you. And that's actually one of the reasons that I very specifically chose not just the species of animal for the skulls in particular, but also the types of bones that represent each of the suits and the major arcana. The major arcana is all skulls, complete skulls with the jaw intact. And that's to sort of, symbolize their power, their primacy. Those are the heavy hitters of the tarot deck. Mm-hmm. You can even see a lot of the symbolism from the minor arcana repeated in the major arcana, but it has more oomph to it.
Right.
With the minors, each one of the suits has a different type of bone associated with it. For example, the pentacles, so coins, those are vertebrae. And the reason I chose vertebrae is because, the backbone of the animal is the thing that supports it. And in our culture, money or resources, however you want to, however you want to conceptualize it, that is the backbone of our lives. Without a way to support our basic needs, the rest of it falls apart.
Right.
So an animal with an animal can survive with a broken leg for a while. It can even survive with a broken jaw. It cannot survive with a broken back.
Right.
And then you have your wands. Speaking of legs, the wands are long bones. The leg bones, foot bones, basically the long skinny bones that go between the shoulder and the toes.
Right.
And I chose that for those because those are active bones. They are the bones that move the animal from place to place. Unless you're a snake, in which case, you just kind of shrug and move on.
Right.
If they had shoulders. Snakes don't have shoulders because they don't have, legs.
Right.
But you get what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
They are the swiftness of the animal. And the wands, of course, have a lot of action and inspiration associated with them. Right. Closely related, your swords are teeth and jaws. And they are decisive. They are active in a somewhat more assertive and sometimes aggressive manner, sometimes even too much. For my King of Swords or not King, but my Knight of Swords is actually a snapping turtle skull. Yeah. And, people think turtles are slow, but if you've ever seen a snapper bite, they are not slow animals when it comes to that bite. And the Knight of Swords has a tendency to also sometimes be very brash and act quickly, sometimes to its own detriment.
Right.
And finally, you have the cups. For the cups, I chose ribs. And the reason I chose ribs is because they contain the most vulnerable parts of an animal. They hold they hold the heart, they hold the lungs, they hold, some of the other organs, but they hold the ones that we really think of as associated with feelings, which is the heart. And, of course, in the tarot, the cups are all about emotions and feelings and relationships and so forth.
Right.
So, I chose the ribs, not just for their shape, but also for their function. Mm-hmm. And the court cards all include both a skull of an animal, but a skull without the jaw, unless, with the exception of a couple swords for reasons because, teeth, jaws, etc. But for example, what the King of Cups is another turtle. It's a red slider turtle, and I've got a little red slider skull, and it's above the shell of a turtle. And the reason being that has taken the ribs, that cupping, and taken it to a wider, use. But each of the court cards is going to have a partial skull, no jaw, with a representative of its of its suit. So, for example, in cups, it's all the cord are all a skull with a rib. For the wands, it's all a skull and then a single long bone. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's fascinating. Like I said, I'm looking at them as we were talking, and if for those of you listening, you should really go and see the site, and we'll have it in the show notes. The link's in the show notes. You know, like I said, it's really fascinating, and it really draws me in, and it's interesting with the King of Cups. You know, it's looking right at you, and you know, granted, it's a skull, but you know, it has that presence to it. It's really amazing work. I'm really enjoying it.
Thank you.
Do you plan on making an actual deck out of these at some point?
That's the plan. The plan is basically, and I've got a production schedule up on the website. From the beginning, the plan was going to be make a deck. So what I'm doing is spending 2015 making the assemblage pieces, which I'm actually I'm pretty much on schedule. I'm a little bit behind because I was out of town for a week, but I work pretty quickly and I shouldn't have any problem getting caught up on that. And then I'll photograph them, and that will be the card art for the deck. And that, again, that'll come out with a companion book, not the little white book, but actually like a full size, 200 some odd page book, self-publishing it. And I'm planning to have that all come out summer of 2016. If all goes well. That's actually part of why I'm doing an Indiegogo campaign starting April 7th, because this is a very resource-intense art project. I've dumped a pretty fair amount of my own money into it already, just making the pieces that I have made. And, I need some more for that. And I also want to start a fund for both the shipping and the printing costs for the deck and the book when they come out.
Excellent. Well, I'm really looking forward to it, and we can put the Indiegogo link in the show notes when that is going, or if you have it earlier, we can put it in earlier for people to look at.
Yep.
And speaking of that, we are just about out of time, so we're going to have all this in the show notes as well. But if people would like to get in touch with you about environmentalism or the Tarot of Bones, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, I have contact information both on both websites. There's my main website, which is thegreenwolf.com. And then there's the Tarot of Bones site, which is thetarotofbones.com. Don't forget the at the beginning.
All right.
And there's contact info, email on both of those. I'm also on Facebook, I'm on Tumblr, et cetera. And all those links are on thegreenwolf.com. There's a links page there. So yeah, I'm pretty, I like getting email from people. I'm pretty good about responding for the most part. And like I said, if people have questions, if they want to know more about stuff, I'm always happy to talk shop.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on This Week in Heresy.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'd like to thank Lupa for joining us this week. As always, if you have comments, questions, or would like to read the show notes, you can go to thisweekinheresy.com. You can support This Week in Heresy by subscribing to the show via iTunes or the Stitcher app, following us on Twitter at TWIH Podcast, or financially through Patreon. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.